We have seen over the last 10 to 15 years significant growth in the two mainstream renewable energy technologies, which is solar photovoltaics and wind energy technologies, driven by subsidy-driven growth in the major renewables markets such as the US, Europe, Japan, and now recently also China. And that subsidy-driven growth has triggered very significant technology improvements as well as mass manufacturing. These combined technology improvements and mass manufacturing together have led to a situation where the costs of both wind and solar PV technologies have literally plummeted down to levels where they can now be considered cost competitive in many, many regions and countries across the globe. So this significant growth of solar PV and wind over the last 15 years led to a situation where last year in 2015 in total 120 gigawatt of combined solar PV and wind were added to the global power system, which is almost the equivalent of today's installed base on the African continent. And in 2015 it was also more new capacity from solar and wind than all other new power generators combined together. All new coal, new nuclear, new gas, new hydro, new diesel, all of that together was less than what solar PV and wind added to the grid in 2015. So this recently achieved cost competitiveness of solar PV and wind compared to new coal-fired power stations is irreversible. The reason for that being that both solar PV and wind are mass manufacturing play. That means the more you do it, the cheaper it gets, as opposed to coal, which means extracting fossil sources from underground, which is a resource play. And a resource play per definition means the more you do it, the more expensive it gets. So therefore this tipping point is irreversible. It will never be changed backwards again. Renewables have now achieved full cost competitiveness and are the least cost way forward. Doesn't mean that things will just happen out of their own. The reason for that being that energy investments and also renewables investments are in their nature infrastructure. And infrastructure is something that always requires strong regulatory framework. It requires policy decisions to be made. And pure market forces will not drive infrastructure investments into the least cost solution just on their own. And therefore what is required is updated energy master plans for basically every country across the globe. Factoring in the true cost and today's achieved cost of renewables. And in many, many countries, the outcome of updated, honest energy master plans will be that it is the least cost way forward to expand the power system or to replace the existing power system based on renewables. But it all starts with a holistic master plan that takes a system view and not the view of one particular player in the system or just of one particular technology in the system. You are in a situation where you have abundant fossil sources, like let's say you sit on very large and very easy to mine coal reserves. Even if that's the case, it is still more costly to mine the coal and to burn the coal and to electrify that coal as compared to building a renewables-based system. So the fact that you have something in abundance, if that something has a lower value than your alternatives, then you will simply not use it. For the same reason, the Stone Age didn't end because of a lack of stones. It ended because we had alternatives as mankind that were more efficient, better, higher value than building things out of stones. So the COP21 Paris Agreement requires us to decarbonize the electricity sector as quickly as possible, starting today, and with a fully decarbonized electricity system by the latest 2050. What that means is if you invest into a new coal-fired power station today, which has many decades of lifetime, you are investing per definition into a stranded asset. So we see that in many countries across the globe, the expansion of the energy system based on solar PV and wind and other renewable energy sources is the least cost way forward. In essence, that means many countries can decarbonize their energy system at negative carbon avoidance cost. So decarbonization and least cost is not a trade-off anymore. As positive as that is, if we look at the nature of a renewables investment, it's a very capital-intensive investment. Now, what does capital-intensive mean? It means that over the lifetime of your asset, most of the costs that you incur is your capital outlay that you have to spend upfront. Now, it is in the nature of a capital-intensive investment that you need certainty about the value that you can generate with that asset over the lifetime of the asset. For a power generator, for a wind farm or for a solar PV plant, that means that you need to have certainty about the fact that someone will buy the energy that you produce, and you need certainty about the tariff that you get for that energy. So the advantage of a renewables investment is that the fuel source, like your sun and your wind or your water in case of a hydro plant, is for free. At the same time, that also means that from a cost structure perspective, most of your cost lies in the upfront capital investment. That makes renewables, generally speaking, very capital intensive. If you build a solar plant, for example, then once you've built it, you are completely locked into that investment. You cannot change the site anymore. You cannot change or influence the solar radiation that you get at that site. You cannot change the technology. And you produce exactly one product, which is electricity. So you're really locked in over a very long lifetime of 20 to 25 years. What that means is that you require someone as the buyer of your energy who guarantees you that this energy will be taken and who guarantees you the tariff / the value that you can make out of that energy. With these two guarantees in place, you will then be able to refinance your asset at the lowest possible cost of capital. Well, in order to get to 300 gigawatt of renewable capacity by 2030 on the African continent, renewables need to be rolled out in a programmatic approach. It will not work on a project-by-project basis. Now, in order to be programmatic, what one needs per country is, as the first step, is a very credible and a very strong buyer for the energy that is produced from renewable energy sources. And that buyer must give the certainty to the investor that over the lifetime of the asset, the energy will be bought, and it will be bought at a guaranteed tariff. So one of the first things that countries need to roll out renewables in a very programmatic manner is a very credible buyer of the energy that is produced by renewable energy sources in the country. So that buyer must guarantee that the energy will be bought, and it must guarantee the tariff at which the energy will be bought from the different renewable power generators. Many African countries will have difficulties to create such a strong buyer and to give the full investment certainty over the lifetime of the renewables assets. That's why we believe that it would be sensible for the international community to step in and to de-risk the investment into renewable assets across different countries by giving guarantees that feed through the national entity all the way to the individual power-producing renewables projects. To be able to roll out renewables in a programmatic way across the African continent, it is sensible for individual countries to create a national buyer, a national entity that guarantees the purchase of the renewable electricity and that guarantees the tariff at which that renewable energy is procured. Many countries will have difficulties to create such a credible buyer that gives a 20-25 year firm guarantee to make the investments secure. That's why one way of addressing that could be for the international community to step in and to create a supranational fund that gives the financial backing to all these individual country entities. So this is an important aspect of the whole programmatic rollout, that the public sector must give the certainty that if you perform as the operator of a renewable asset, that you will be paid. On the other hand, the owner of the renewable asset must be clear that it's his or her role to produce energy and to perform. And you get the certainty that if you perform, you will be paid. So the performance-based payments for renewable energy and for reliable customer electricity connections is also the basis for confidence of the international community to make money available for such a scheme. Because any money that flows only flows if a service has been delivered, either in form of renewable electricity or in form of a reliable customer electricity connection. It is in the nature of renewable energy technologies that they have a spatial component to it. It means they are not central and concentrated in certain areas, like a coal-fired power station that sits right next to the coal mine. But you harvest the sun and you harvest the wind and you harvest the biomass across very wide areas. Because of that technical nature of renewables, they are distributed in the purest sense. That has two aspects to it, which are co-benefits of going into a renewables world. The first one is that because of the distributed nature, you can run many electrification processes in parallel. So you can bring power to the people much quicker than in a centralized approach, where you have to build the large central power station first and then build the transmission lines. So there's a time advantage. And a second socioeconomic aspect is that because renewables are smaller, they are modular, they are much smaller investment chunks per project. It opens the door for a very distributed ownership base of the power generators as well. It's relatively easy, even for private individuals or small cooperatives, to become owner of power generating assets, where historically that was completely unthinkable. For a large coal-fired power station, you need a large utility type of structure to be able to fund such an investment. And now for even a wind turbine, that is different, and a community can get together and finance a wind turbine. Because renewables are small and modular in nature, you can deploy them at hundreds, if not thousands, of different sites simultaneously at the same time. That means you can bring power to the people in a very parallelized manner, which speeds up the deployment of the power system tremendously, or it has the potential to do that. Renewables have the potential to bring power to the people much faster than the conventional power system architecture does, for two reasons. One reason is that one individual renewable project, a small wind farm or a solar PV plant, is much faster to be constructed and deployed than a large coal-fired power station. We are talking up to 10 years for a coal-fired power station, from investment decision to first power being produced. For a solar plant, it can be a few months. For a wind farm, we are talking between a year and 1.5 years between investment decision and first power being produced. That is the one aspect. The other aspect is that because these individual projects are relatively small and modular in nature, you can parallelize the whole investment rollout. And you can run many hundreds, if not thousands, projects at the same time, therefore bringing power into the system much quicker than in the conventional way. The distributed asset base in a renewables-based power system allows people to take ownership of the power generating assets, and therefore moving away from being a pure consumer in the electricity system to becoming a producer as well.
And also, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So especially for rural communities, the electrification based on renewables allows to get a second revenue income stream, second to agricultural income stream. It can be an income stream of producing power, feeding that power into the grid, and that power is then delivered to the end customers, which is large industries, large cities, and essentially money is then flowing from the end customer all the way back to the owner of the power generating assets, which can be rural communities. 100% renewables-based energy system is today not only technically possible, it is also in many instances already the economical way to go, and where it's not the case yet, it will be the case in the next 10 years. So what that means is that the transition to a 100% renewables-based energy system is increasingly difficult the more existing infrastructure you already have, because you have to convert an existing architecture, an existing energy system into something new, which is now renewables based. For many African countries, we are really at the starting point of a development, and that allows many African countries to leapfrog the centralized power system approach into a 100% renewables-based system, because you can plan on a blank sheet of paper and optimally design the system from the word go.
Great. So you can say Africa.
So in essence, the African continent could be the leader and the first to implement 100% renewables-based energy systems. So 100% renewables-based energy systems were literally always technically possible. It's always a question about the cost. Is it economical to do so? The natural resource in form of wind, in form of sun, in form of biomass and hydro and geothermal in many African countries as well, the natural resource is abundant, and the technical limits are non-existing. So there's no technical limitation to running an entire energy system purely on renewables. It's a pure economic consideration now. And because of the cost reduction of the bulk energy providers, solar PV and wind, we are now getting into an era where it's also economical to run these very high renewable energy systems. So the wider energy system not only contains the electricity sector, it in addition also includes the transport sector and the heating and cooling sector. These three energy end-use sectors together make the total energy system. Now, to introduce renewables into the energy system is the easiest in the electricity sector. It's technically the easiest, and it's also economically the easiest. If we want to go for a 100% renewables-based total energy system, which includes transport and the heating and cooling sector, it is an essential part that we integrate these three sectors and electrify as much as possible in the transport and in the heating and cooling sector. Only residual non-electrifiable energy demand in the transport sector, such as aviation industry or seaborne transport, will still require for the foreseeable future liquid fuels. And these can come from liquid biofuels, or they can also come from artificially, synthetically produced liquid fuels that get their energy from renewable electricity. From a technical perspective, there is no limitation to the amount of renewable energy that you can introduce into the system, and a 100% renewables-based energy system can power all the needs for energy that we have today. That includes large industries, large mining industries, heavy steel, iron and steel industries, all the way to the commercial, industrial and to the residential sector. So in this new energy system, we now have many hundreds thousands of customers being supplied by also hundreds of thousands of individual power generators. But that system gives at least the same reliability, and you could argue even a higher reliability than the traditional central power system, because you have many more power generators where if one individual one fails, the system doesn't necessarily collapse. Yeah. So to move into renewables-based energy systems is not only socially and environmentally desirable, it is also technically feasible, and recently it's now also the most economical way to go. That evidence is building up globally, and it's increasingly clear that the global energy transition is moving into that direction. So African leaders, through the creation of AREI, have already taken bold steps into the direction of a 100% renewables-based energy system, and it's now about implementing that vision and for the African continent to become the global leader in these future energy systems.